I have been waiting for you, Link. Link, the hero of time. You have overcome many hardships and awakened the six sages. And now you have a final challenge, a showdown with Ganondorf, the king of evil. Before that, I have things I want to tell only to you. Please listen. Another unknown legend of the Triforce passed down by the Shadow Folk, the Sheikah. If you would seek the sacred triangles, listen well. The resting place of the sacred triangle, the sacred realm, is a mirror that reflects what is in the heart of the one who enters it. If an evil heart, the realm will become full of evil. If pure, the realm will become a paradise. The Triforce, the sacred triangle, it is a balance that weighs the three forces, power, wisdom, and courage. If the heart of the one who holds the sacred triangle has all three forces in balance, that one will gain the true force to govern all. But if that one's heart is not in balance, the Triforce will separate into three parts, power, wisdom, and courage. Only one part will remain with the one who touched the Triforce, the part that represents the force that the one most believes in. If that one seeks the true force, that one must acquire the lost two parts. Those two parts will be held within others chosen by destiny who will bear the Triforce mark on the backs of their hand. "7 years ago, Ganondorf, the king of thieves, used the door you opened in the Temple of Time and entered the sacred realm. But when he laid his hands on the Triforce, the legend came true. The Triforce separated into three parts. Only the Triforce of power remained in Ganondorf's hand. The strength of the Triforce of power enabled him to become a mighty, evil king, but his dark ambitions were not satisfied. To gain complete mastery of the world, Ganondorf started to look for those chosen by destiny to hold the other two Triforce parts. The one who holds the Triforce of courage is you, Link. And the other, who holds the Triforce of wisdom, is the seventh sage, who is destined to be the leader of them all. It is I, the Princess of Hyrule, Zelda. I apologize for meeting you in disguise, but it was necessary to hide from the King of Evil. Please forgive me. On that day, 7 years ago, Ganondorf attacked Hyrule Castle. I saw you as I was escaping from the castle with my attendant Impa. I thought I should entrust the Ocarina to you. I thought it would be our best chance. As long as you had the Ocarina in your possession, I thought Ganondorf could never enter the Sacred Realm, but something I could never expect happened. After you opened the Door of Time, the Master Sword sealed you away in the Sacred Realm. Your spirit remained in the Sacred Realm, and then the Triforce fell into Ganondorf's hands. He went on to invade the Sacred Realm. Ganondorf had become the Evil King, and the Sacred Realm became the world of evil. All of this is an unforeseen consequence. I passed myself off as a Sheikah and hoped that you would return. I waited for 7 years. And now you are back. The Dark Age, ruled by Ganondorf, the Evil King, will end. The six sages will open the sealed door and lure Ganondorf into the Sacred Realm. And then, I will then seal the door to the Sacred Realm from this world. Thus Ganondorf, the Evil King, will vanish from Hyrule. Link, in order to do this, I need your courage again. Please protect me while I do my part. And here is the weapon that can penetrate the evil king's defenses, the power given to the chosen ones. The Sacred Light Arrow. You got the light arrow. The light of justice will smite evil. That rumbling, it can't be. Princess Zelda, you foolish traitor. I commend you for avoiding my pursuit for 7 long years. But you let your guard down. I knew that you would appear if I let the kid wander around. My only mistake was to slightly underestimate the power of this kid. No, it was not the kid's power I misjudged. It was the power of the Triforce of Courage. But with the Triforce of Wisdom that Zelda has, when I obtain these two, then I will become the true ruler of the world. If you want to rescue Zelda, come to my castle. What's up, adventurers? My name is Platinum Phoenix, and welcome back to Ocarina of Time. Last time, we did everything we could to power up before heading back here to the Temple of Time. And in this episode, Princess Zelda was just kidnapped, so we need to head over to Ganondorf's castle to see if we can rescue her. But there is a ton to talk about with that cutscene that we just watched. And I actually want to hone in on the fact that Sheik was just revealed to us to be Zelda this whole time. And I really like that reveal, and I think it's a really cool reveal because it was hinted at a lot throughout the second half of the game when we became adult Link. Like, the fact that Sheik was the first character that we saw outside of the Sacred Realm when we became adult Link, and that they knew all about, one, us, and two, the Triforce and the Sacred Realm, was a really big hint towards them being someone of importance and someone that really had a deep understanding of the royal family as well as the history of Hyrule. And it's just neat looking back now that we know that Sheik is Zelda to catch all the little details that we missed. Another detail is that Impa, when we awakened her as the Sage of Shadow, told us to keep the princess safe and to look after her, but she never actually told us where the princess was. And at that point, we had not seen the princess throughout the entire time of being an adult. So it was almost like Impa was saying, hey, she's in hiding, but you will know when to protect her. And it's just these nice little hints that you can go back and see, like I said, now that we know that Sheik is Zelda. And the most impressive part about all of it is that we get all of these hints with only seeing Sheik 9 times in total throughout the entire game, with one of them being the reveal that she is Zelda. So it's just really interesting seeing how all of those small interactions connect to this bigger reveal. And the other thing that we get from that cutscene is actually the light arrows, but I think those will be better to go over slightly later. Link, can you hear me? It's Raru, the Sage. We six will gather our power to create a bridge to the castle where Ganondorf dwells. The castle's keep, which is known as Ganon's Tower, is protected by 6 evil barriers. Bring down the 6 barriers and save Princess Zelda. And with the power of the 6 sages, we are able to make our way into Ganondorf's castle. And the first thing I actually want to go over within Ganondorf's castle is actually the music. And I want to just be quiet for a little bit to allow you to listen to the music that is in here. So the reason I wanted you to listen to the music here is because it's actually a perfect representation for what we are doing in the first half of this castle. Because like Raru told us, we need to go throughout 6 chambers in order to turn off the 6 evil seals, which will in turn turn off this barrier, which will allow us inside further into the castle. But what Raru doesn't actually tell us is that each of these different chambers are actually designed after the 6 different temples, and the music of the castle is actually the perfect amalgamation of all of the themes of the different temples and the different dungeons we have been through because of all of the motifs that it pulls in. Like, you can hear a whirling sound within the theme of the castle, which actually comes straight from the Fire Temple and the Ice Cavern, or this screeching sound, which is from Dodongo's Cavern. And even the undead groaning sounds that you would think would just be the Redeads or the Gyptos from outside is actually from the Shadow Temple. And like I said, I just think it's a brilliant music design for this because it really pulls everything together for what we are doing in at least the first half of the castle. And to get back to the chambers, because I talked about them a little bit, we can basically do them in any order we want with 2 exceptions. I would not recommend going into the fire chamber or the light chamber because, as you can see, the light chamber actually has this like giant obelisk pillar thing in front of it that we physically cannot move right now. So we have to get a different item in order to be able to move that out of our way so we can actually get in there. So what we are going to do is actually start at the entrance here, and we are just going to go counterclockwise around this room. And very fittingly, that means our first challenge is actually the forest chamber, if we can get in the door. And these chambers, I mentioned that they are designed after the different temples, but another way to think about them is that they are just mini versions of the temple, and they loosely emulate each of the temples. For example, this first room here in the forest chamber actually has 2 references to the forest temple. The first is this Wolfos here. The first enemies we fought in the forest temple were actually two Wolfos outside the front door of the forest temple, which means that Wolfos there is most likely either a reference to that or a reference to the first Wolfos we ever faced in the game, which was in the Sacred Forest Meadow, which is the maze type place in front of the forest temple. But the other reference here is actually these four torches. If you remember back to the forest temple, our main goal in that temple was actually to go around and defeat the four Poe sisters, which in turn would have lit a different torch, which were in the main area of the forest temple in this exact same layout. Um, and even that top torch in the top there could have been a reference to the dungeon boss, since the Poe sisters were only mini bosses, which in the Forest Temple. So we have the four mini bosses plus the temple boss represented by the torches. And I think it's just a really cool way of calling back to the Poe sisters that were within the Forest Temple. But these mini chambers, or these chambers, aren't just representations of the temples that we have in the game currently. They are actually also representations of the remnants of the different stages of the temples that we got or that we didn't get. Like take this wind chamber here. This, if you were just playing through the game, would probably make more sense to you in, say, the Shadow Temple, because the Shadow Temple is actually the only temple we saw these types of wind these types of goblin fan things in. So it would have made more sense to people just playing through the game if they were in the Shadow Chamber instead of this Forest Chamber. But there was actually a leak that data miners found that shows a lot of different early stage development stuff about the different temples. Talking about the temples and the medallions in specific. And that leak actually calls the forest medallion the wind medallion. So it's actually very likely that in early stages of development, the forest temple was actually going to be called the wind temple and have a lot of different wind type puzzles in it, and would have rewarded you with the wind medallion at the end of the temple instead of the forest medallion. And that, using that leak, it actually makes a lot of sense that this chamber would be in a forest chamber or the wind chamber, um, due to the early stage of development of that dungeon. And another thing I want to talk about is actually the medallions themselves, because the medallions right now are just collectibles that show which temples you have completed and which stages you have awakened. But what it isn't are, they weren't always collectibles, is basically what I'm trying to say. In fact, the medallions were meant to be the original way Link got magic within the game. In the same leak that we learned about the wind temple, the wind medallion was also listed, and they also list all the magic that each of the medallions would have given. And I want to talk about all of the medallions, but I think it makes the most sense to talk about them as we go through each of their chambers. So for the wind medallion, the original magic that it would have given Link would have been the power to warp when in danger, which is word for word what the leak said. And I take this to basically be a very early prototype of what would later have become Fiore's wind. And I think it's really cool that the wind power, or the wind medallion power, would have basically been the power to teleport on the wind. The only bad thing is that we would have had to wait till the forest temple to get it, which wouldn't have been great because the Fiore's wind is really good in the forest temple, and not having it for that would have probably made it a lot more tedious to go through. But now that we are at the end of the chamber here, all we need to do is equip light arrows, and we just need to shoot these glowing orbs to release the seals with the light arrows. The forest barrier is dispelled. Hurry up, Link. actually very nice of them to teleport you back out of the chambers so you don't have to run all the way back through. But our next chamber we need to go through is the water chamber. Or I guess it would be more accurate to call it the ice chamber. And that actually is something I want to talk about because this is probably much more reminiscent of the ice cavern rather than the water temple. And that is because in the same link that I was talking about in the forest chamber, we got a confirmation almost that the water temple wasn't the original plan for what the temple was actually going to be. And it was originally actually going to be an ice temple. And there is actually a couple of pieces of evidence that helps to show that. Like the fact that this chamber is all ice and not water, but also the fact that Zora's domain is frozen within the game after we become adult Link and never actually gets unfrozen. So a place of the ice temple would have allowed you to defeat what would have been an ice enemy, which would have allowed Zora's domain to actually thaw within the game, which I think would have made more sense than us just refilling Lake Hylia and not doing anything to help the Zoras. Another thing that really helps to show that the water medallion was originally an ice medallion is actually, if we pull up the gear, you can see that within the water medallion is actually a snowflake design, which I don't know about you, but it isn't usually the first place my mind goes when thinking of water, but it's pretty good to show ice. But speaking of the ice medallion, I want to talk about the ice medallion's magic real quick because it's actually really cool. So the ice medallion's power would have been the power to put out fire. Which in the exact words of the leak, I believe it says put out the power to put out fire with one click is, I believe, how they put it. And I don't actually know, I don't think it has any power within the game that actually connects to it because there's no real mechanic in the game of putting out fire, which makes me think that there was a stage in development where you would have had to go to a burning city or something and had to put out fire in order to save the city. Almost like how Kakariko Village was put on fire once Bongo Bongo escaped from the bottom of the well. But we never had to deal with any of that fire, and it never really talked about at all. So it's just a weird power that isn't really given any explanation or anything. And I think it makes a lot of sense that it wasn't actually in the final version of the game because, like I said, there's no real purpose of putting out fire within the actual game. The water barrier is dispelled. Hurry up! So you probably noticed that whenever we defeat one of these chambers, that medallion at the top darkens. And it's really nice that they actually do that because it's basically just their way of saying, hey, you've done this room, you don't need to go in this door anymore. And it makes it so you don't have to look up and see which of the different beams are still going, so you know which doors to go in. But our next chamber we need to go through is the Shadow Chamber. And this one is actually pretty interesting because it is probably, or not probably, it is the first example we have of a almost perfect representation of the temple it's trying to emulate. And what I mean by that is this is the first one that is, one, only one room, so it's very condensed, and two, it uses specifically the hover boots and the lens of truth along with fire arrows to allow you to see these hidden pathways that you need to walk in order to get through this chamber. And it's actually really cool how they designed it. But saying that, I actually want to talk about the Shadow Medallion, because the Shadow Medallion is also a really interesting concept, and those just disappeared right from under me. But the Shadow Medallion, its phrasing's a little weird, if I'm being honest. In the leak, it phrases it as saying, it's dark and the enemies don't even notice, which can mean a couple of different things. If you take it literally, it could mean that it was supposed to be the almost like the opposite of the Sun Song, where it makes it nighttime instead of daytime, which would have been a pretty cool concept. Despite the fact that the Sun Song already does that. The other way you could take it is more metaphorically, where it's more like, oh, the enemies can't see you, therefore the enemies can't attack you. And using it in that context is actually really interesting, because it would almost be like a stealth magic in that context. Meaning that if the enemies can't see you, they can't hit you. And that should also sound familiar, because it would almost be like a prototype of Nehru's love, which is really interesting to think about, that the Shadow Medallion would have been the prototype of Nehru's love, and not something like the Spirit or Light Medallion, that you get closer to where the actual Nehru's love is located. It's just something interesting to think about. Also, the Shadow Medallion wasn't originally called the Shadow Medallion, and the Shadow Temple wasn't actually the Shadow Temple. It was originally called the Darkness Temple, which aligns with what the wording of the medallion's power would have been. But with that being said, we have a big chest here. You found the golden gauntlet. You can feel even more power coursing through your arms. Grab with A and lift stuff up. So these golden gauntlets are direct increases in the power of the silver gauntlets. In fact, they completely replaced the silver gauntlets we just got, which is very funny that we got the silver gauntlets in the very last dungeon, our very last temple, and immediately are like, oh, get rid of these. We got better ones. And immediately replace them for these golden ones. But basically, the only things that these golden gauntlets allow us to do is move those giant pillars that we saw in front of like the light chamber, which is why we needed to go through these chambers before going through the light chamber and the fire chamber, because both of them require you to have the golden gauntlets in order to actually complete them, or in the light chamber's case, to even enter them. But with that being said, we once again have reached the end of this chamber and just need to shoot the power. The shadow barrier is dispelled. Please save the princess. Talking about chambers that need the golden gauntlets in order to progress in them, our next chamber is actually the fire chamber here. And you can see that it is very inspired by the fire chamber, with all the lava and everything everywhere, making it very hot in here. So I actually have two recommendations for you. The first is just wear the Goron tunic. You do not want to burn up and lose all of your hearts while collecting the rupees, because then it makes you recollect all of them and it's a real hassle. And the other piece of advice I have is, if we jump on this middle platform, you can see that it starts to sink. And we can actually prevent that by just wearing the hover boots. I don't actually know why this works, but I'm assuming it's something to do with Link being lighter with the hover boots on or something. But I will also say that this only works with the middle platform for some reason. As you can see, other platforms still sink. So you just have to be careful with that. But I do recommend just using the hover boots, so you don't really have to worry about the main problem of this room. But with that being said, now I want to talk about the fire medallion and its original magic that it was going to have. And you can probably already guess what the original power of the fire medallion was. But in the beta leak, it was listed as the magic of fire, which, thank you for stating the obvious, leak. But it was almost certainly just the original version of Din's fire within the game. And this is one of the more unique ones where we actually have more evidence than just the leak to go off of to actually know that. And one of the biggest pieces of evidence is actually the Shadow Temple of all places. If you remember, the entrance of the Shadow Temple was a place where we had to light a bunch of torches in order to open the door to get inside. And within that place, wherever you are, where you needed to stand in order to light all of the torches, actually had a symbol in that spot. And that symbol was actually the symbol of the fire medallion, which would have made a lot of sense for a couple of reasons. One, if the fire medallion originally was Din's fire, it was basically just telling you, hey, use the fire medallion here to light all the torches. But the other thing is, since the Shadow Temple requires you to go through the Forest of Fire and the Water Temples before even accessing it, it guarantees that you would have had the fire medallion in order to use it there, when the game doesn't actually require you to have Din's fire at all, within the confines of going through just the story progression of the game in the actual version, which is really cool to actually think about the two different ways. But with that being said, that is the fire chamber. The fire barrier is dispelled. Hurry up, brother. So I kind of talked through it last time because I was talking about the fire medallion and everything. But can we just talk about how strong these golden gauntlets make Link? Like, look how absurd this is when I go to move this obelisk. That thing is like 30 times Link's size, and he just over his head, or he threw it just like straight over his head and shattered the obelisk. Do you know how insanely strong that he would have to be to do that? And you know what? He still has to use two hands for his sword. But with that being said, next up is the light chamber. And the light chamber is interesting because it's not based on a temple, because we didn't have a light temple at all. It is actually based on a couple of different temples. Like, this first room is very much based on the Shadow Temple, where we have to use the Lens of Truth to find the different enemies. And by finding them and taking them out, we are able to make this chest spawn, allowing us to get the small key to progress on into the room. And the other two rooms are also very inspired by the other temples. Kind of like this next room where we have to use Zelda's Lullaby, which is basically used throughout the entire game in every single temple and every single dungeon. So, inspiration's pretty easy for this one. But what I actually want to talk about is the Light Temple rumors that were about, because there was a rumor that the Light Temple was cut during the development of the game, and there's a couple of different reasons that that rumor actually exists. The first is that Rauru is already in the spirit realm whenever we become an adult, and he gives us the light medallion as soon as we become an adult. So people theorize that it was actually supposed to be a light temple where we awaken Rauru and get the light medallion in order to actually, like I said, get the light medallion instead of just getting it handed to us. But another thing that shows that is evidence towards that is actually Sheik. When she gave us the light arrows right before they became kidnapped, a lot of people believed that the light arrows would have been the perfect dungeon item for the light temple, and that is a reason that people believed that there was meant to be a light temple, and it was just cut sometime during development. And I should probably say there's no actual concrete say that it was supposed to be in the game, but it is very likely that it was just cut at some point during development. But talking about stuff that was cut, we should probably talk about the light medallion, which most likely would have been a replacement for the light arrows, because the description on the light medallion straight up just says create light to capture the darkness. So it could mean a couple of different things. Like, it could have been a prototype sun song where it made it daylight and literally captured the darkness by removing it with sunlight. But like I said, I believe it's more likely that it was just a predecessor to what would have become the light arrows, because the light arrows were described as arrows that can pierce the darkness, and it's a very similar description to what the light medallion would have been. The light barrier is dispelled. Hurry! And fittingly enough, just like our journey, our final chamber we need to go through is the Spirit Chamber. And I actually want to start off the Spirit Chamber by talking about the Spirit Medallion, because there's a lot of stuff to talk about this chamber. But this room isn't super linked to really anything about the Spirit Temple, so I think it makes most sense to actually talk about the Spirit Medallion first. So the Spirit Medallion, what it says in the leak is that it was made to become Navi and fly around, which is really strange if you really think about it. It would have made puzzles more difficult, I think, in the final version, because if you had the ability to fly upwards and basically put your soul into Navi to allow you to fly around and see things from a different perspective, it probably would have made things more difficult. But also, this is something they actually brought back in a future game, being Twilight Princess, of all places, ironically. Because in Twilight Princess, you have things called animal grass, and the animal grasses in that game literally allow you to take control of animals and use them for various different purposes, which is a really cool idea that probably came from the idea of the Spirit Medallion in early stages of development for Ocarina of Time. The only thing is that you are only limited in Twilight Princess to certain spaces you can use the animal grasses, and I think it's a better idea to do it that way rather than use it in the way they were probably planning for Ocarina of Time. But now that we have gone through the medallion, the reason I wanted to wait to talk about the chamber here is actually because, like I said, the first room wasn't really anything connected to the Spirit Temple itself, but the other two rooms are very much connected. Like, this first room, or the second room here, requires you to use a bomb shoe to shoot it toward that switch, which I missed by like half an inch. So we're gonna try that again. But But bomb shoes are very linked to the Spirit Temple and to the Gerudo area because of one, the carpet salesman that sells you the bomb shoes for 200 rupees, but also the fact that you use bomb shoes throughout the Spirit Temple in ways of making light appear so you can use the light. And then the other way that this is very reminiscent to the Spirit Temple is that you have to use fire arrows here to make light appear, and the light puzzle here is just ripped straight out of the Spirit Temple, almost verbatim. But with that, we have made it to the end of our final chamber, and we just need to shoot this power with our light arrow. The spirit barrier is dispelled. Hurry up, kid. All right, and with that, that is all 6 of the seals broken, taking down this main barrier and allowing us deeper into the castle. So I think we are going to end this episode off here, since we are right at about the halfway point of the castle itself. So I hope that everyone enjoyed watching. If you did, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Next time, we head deeper into the castle to see if we can rescue Princess Zelda. But until then, happy adventuring.